What would you do if someone you loved most turned into the person who hurt you the deepest? My name is Eleanor Walsh, and I never imagined that I'd be fighting not just for my dignity, but for my freedom. This story isn't easy to tell, but if you're watching, stay with me. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to this channel and comment where in the world you're watching from. I always thought growing old would come with a kind of quiet wisdom, tea in the afternoons, birds in the backyard, and maybe a book or two I'd finally finish. What I didn't expect was that growing old would feel like being erased, one decision at a time. My name is Eleanor Walsh. I'm years old, and until a few months ago, I lived alone in the house my husband Richard and I built together in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Every flower in the front yard had a story. The kitchen still smelled like his coffee. I wasn't ready to leave. I didn't need to leave. I had slipped on a throw rug in the living room. Not badly. I was a little bruised, but still sharp, still walking, still me. But that single fall was all the ammunition my son Daniel needed. He showed up the next morning, early, with a look in his eyes I couldn't place. Cold, distant. He didn't even ask how I was. He came in with a briefcase and a tight schedule, speaking in bullet points. "Mom, we found a really good facility. It's time. It's the best for everyone." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but he wasn't laughing. "Daniel," I said, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm fine. This is my home." But he had already made the arrangements. My things had been packed. The paperwork was signed. I stood in the hallway, watching as two strangers came to move my boxes. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't happening. I tried to argue, tried to fight back, but the look in his eyes, like I was some kind of project, a burden to be managed, made the words catch in my throat. "You fell," he said. "You could have broken your hip. You live alone. It's too risky. And frankly, I don't have the time to keep checking in on you." He didn't say it with cruelty. He said it with efficiency. That somehow made it worse. They took me in a van. I wasn't even allowed to ride in his car. I remember the silence, that deep, cold silence that settled into my bones as we pulled away from the only life I knew. The facility was clean, modern, with big windows and neutral-colored walls, but it smelled faintly of bleach and something I can only describe as abandonment, a silence you can't describe unless you've lived it. I remember sitting on the edge of the new bed in the room they assigned me. My name was on a label stuck to the door, like I was a package, or a misplaced item someone finally decided to store away. I waited for Daniel to say something, maybe an apology, a reassurance, but all he said was, "I'll check in later this week. Don't worry, Mom. You'll be comfortable here." Then he left, just like that. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there looking around. The walls were bare, my belongings reduced to a suitcase. The home I had filled with memories now lived only in my head. I wasn't old enough to forget things, but I was old enough to be forgotten. That night, I lay in a bed that wasn't mine, listening to the soft buzz of fluorescent lights in the hallway. I thought about Richard, about how we used to laugh at the idea of growing old apart, how we promised we'd always take care of each other. And now he was gone, and my son had put me away like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. Not yet. Something inside me stirred that night, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not even sadness. It was the beginning of a quiet defiance. They thought I was finished, but they had no idea what I was about to do. I stared at the ceiling until morning, planning everything. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of soft wheels rolling down the hallway. Med carts, I'd later learn. That and the occasional shuffle of feet. It was the kind of place where even time seemed medicated. My door was slightly open, and I could hear someone coughing from the room next to mine. The smell of scrambled eggs and overboiled coffee drifted in. I dressed myself slowly, every movement a reminder that I still had control over something. When I stepped into the hallway, I was greeted by polite nods and tight smiles from the staff. Not warmth, not recognition, just routine. I was part of the furniture now. The common area was filled with muted conversations and television noise. No one looked up. No one asked my name. Some stared blankly at game shows. Others dozed off with plastic cups of juice untouched beside them. I stood there, invisible in plain sight. I sat in a corner by the window. The sky was gray. A squirrel hopped along the fence outside and stopped to look in. And for a moment, I envied it, free to run wherever it pleased, No paperwork required. Daniel didn't call that day, or the next. It wasn't until the fourth day that he appeared. His shirt tucked in like he'd come straight from work, which, knowing him, he probably had. He sat down across from me in the lounge, not even pretending to make eye contact. "I brought your insurance documents," he said, handing over a stack I didn't ask for. "And a few photos for your nightstand." There were 3. One of him as a child, one of Richard holding Daniel as a baby, and one of me, cropped out of a family vacation photo like an afterthought. I stared at them in silence. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. His voice had that edge, the tone people use when they want to appear kind, but hope you'll say no. I wanted to ask him why. Why this? Why now? Why couldn't he just check in on me from time to time like a decent son? But I knew his answer already. "This is easier." So I said nothing. "You're quiet," he commented. "I'm thinking," I replied. He looked uncomfortable, like even that small bit of resistance unsettled him. And then he said something I'll never forget. "It's not like I don't care, Mom, but you've had your time. Now let me handle things." Had my time? As if life came with an expiration date. As if I had nothing left to live or offer or feel. He left after 10 minutes, didn't hug me, didn't say he loved me. Just walked out like he had finished a task. The following week passed in a blur. Meals served at scheduled times. Bingo games with prizes that didn't matter. I tried to smile at the other residents, but most were too lost in their own silence. Others were too far gone to even remember their names. That's when I realized the cruelest part of this place wasn't the boredom. It was the erasure. They don't just strip away your independence. They strip away your identity. No one here knew that I once worked as a librarian, that I played the piano for Richard every Sunday morning, that I baked pies from scratch, that I read every Steinbeck novel twice. To them, I was just room, just a fall risk, just another old woman whose time had passed, until one afternoon, when a nurse I hadn't seen before walked in, holding a clipboard and a gentle smile. Her hair was pulled back, her scrubs clean, but her eyes were tired in a way only someone who carried too much for too long could understand. "Mrs. Walsh?" she asked. "Hi, I'm Marissa. I'll be checking in on you this week." I nodded. She sat down without the usual distance most staff kept. "Is there anything you want me to know about you?" she asked. It was such a simple question, but no one had asked me that since I arrived. I stared at her for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Then I said, "I like crossword puzzles. I make a mean lemon meringue pie, and I still remember the smell of my husband's shaving cream." Marissa smiled. "That's good. I'd like to know more." And just like that, something shifted. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't pretending. She saw me. She returned the next day, and the next. We talked, laughed. She brought me tea from the break room when the dining hall was out. She called me Eleanor instead of Mrs. Walsh, and she remembered the name of my favorite singer from the 70s. She told me about her daughter, about her mother who had Alzheimer's, and about working nights to cover extra shifts. She never complained, but her voice carried weight, and slowly, she became the only reason I didn't feel completely invisible. I still missed my house. I missed Richard, and I still felt betrayed. But for the first time since I'd been forced into this place, I wasn't just waiting to fade away. I was watching, listening, and learning who was still on my side and who never truly had been. Because somewhere in that silence, I was beginning to understand something. This wasn't just a nursing home. This was the stage for a battle I hadn't realized I was about to fight. I began to notice the little things first. The way the staff knocked twice before entering. The way certain residents stared off at nothing, their stories trapped behind tired eyes. The way people stopped asking you questions once they decided you were just old. But with Marissa, it was different. She saw past the wrinkles, past the scheduled medications, and the chart on the door. She listened when I spoke, not with sympathy, but with respect, as if I still mattered. Every morning she made time for me, even when she was busy. She'd peek her head in my room and say, "Morning, Eleanor. You good today?" Just that, those few words, gave my day purpose. She treated me like a person, not a case file. It had been 2 weeks since Daniel last visited. Not that I expected much. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent. He hadn't called. No messages. Not even a check-in. And yet, there I was, telling stories to a nurse, half my age, like she was the only family I had left. Marissa had this laugh, warm and real. the kind that caught me off guard sometimes. She told me about her little girl, Mia, who had just turned 6, about how she loved peanut butter sandwiches and hated going to sleep. "She insists I leave the hallway light on," she said one night as we sat by the small garden behind the center. "Says it keeps the nightmares away." I smiled. "Smart girl." "Smarter than me most days," she replied, and her voice cracked slightly. She looked away, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. I didn't press, but I noticed her hands, slightly calloused, nails trimmed short, the hands of someone who had to do everything herself. Later, she told me her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. Marissa was 29 then. She'd taken on 2 jobs to keep up with bills, had to move her mom into her apartment because she couldn't afford a facility. "And your husband?" I asked gently. She smiled, but it was hollow. "Walked out when I told him I wouldn't put my mom in a home. Said he wasn't ready to carry that kind of weight." That kind of weight. I knew the feeling. I carried it too. Every day since Richard passed. That night, I lay in bed thinking about her, about the sacrifices, the loneliness, the way she smiled even with the world on her shoulders. And I thought about how little Daniel seemed to know about weight, or loyalty, or love. The contrast was unbearable. One morning after breakfast, I asked Marissa if she could help me find my lawyer's number. She blinked, surprised, but didn't question me, just nodded. "Of course, I'll bring you a phone and a quiet place to make the call." I could see it in her eyes. She didn't want to pry, but I knew she sensed something bigger was unfolding. It took less than 5 minutes. My lawyer, James Palmer, had been our family attorney for years. He remembered my voice immediately. "I need to make changes to my will," I told him, "and I'd like to start paperwork for an adult adoption." There was a pause. "Eleanor, are you sure?" "I've never been more certain." That same afternoon, I wrote 2 letters, one to Daniel, short, cold, and factual, and one to Marissa. That one I sealed and hid inside the drawer of my nightstand. I wasn't ready to give it to her yet, but when the time came, I wanted her to know. She wasn't just a nurse. She was family now. I didn't tell her that day, or the next. Instead, we kept our routine, talking about books, her daughter's spelling homework, the weather. But something had changed in me. I no longer felt like a passive observer in this place. I had a purpose again, a quiet mission, a legacy to rewrite. Because if Daniel thought he could decide the ending of my story without even asking me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was, and I wouldn't need to raise my voice to do it. It was early October when the leaves outside the facility turned that sharp, rust-colored red. I remember staring out the window one morning, watching them fall like paper memories, drifting slowly to the ground. Something about the quietness of it reminded me of how my life had been slipping away, piece by piece, while no one seemed to notice, except Marissa. That day, she brought me a cup of chamomile tea, real chamomile, not the powdered kind. She had found it at a discount store on her way to work. "I thought of you," she said. "Smells like something you'd like." And it did. It smelled like my old kitchen, like Sunday mornings with Richard reading the newspaper while I baked cinnamon rolls. We sat together by the window, just watching the trees for a while. She looked tired, more than usual, but still kept that soft, steady calmness. That was Marissa's magic. No matter what was going wrong in her life, she made you feel like you were the most important thing in the world during those few minutes together. She told me Mia had gotten sick the night before. Fever, sore throat. She'd stayed up all night rubbing her back, giving her water, holding her little hand. "It's nothing serious, just a virus," she said, but I could hear the edge in her voice, the exhaustion, the fear that creeps in when you're doing it all alone. I asked her, "Do you ever get a break?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll rest when she's grown. Right now, she needs me." Something clicked in me then, a knowing, a silent confirmation of everything I'd been feeling. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition. I saw myself in her. The younger me who had once held Daniel in her arms through countless sleepless nights. The woman who sacrificed weekends, vacations, and promotions for her family. The difference? I did all that, and ended up in a place like this. But Marissa, she deserved better. Later that day, I called James, my lawyer, again. I finalized the amendment to my will. Half of my estate, including the house, savings, and remaining investments, would go to Marissa Carter. No fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet legal promise. It was the first time since Richard died that I felt like I was doing something that mattered again. Over the following days, I kept a journal, a real one, leather-bound with pages that smelled like old bookstores. I wrote letters to Marissa, to Mia, even one to myself. I poured in everything, my memories, my regrets, the betrayal that still echoed from Daniel's voice when he said, "You've had your time." Each word was like stitching up a wound. One evening, I invited Marissa to sit with me in the garden behind the facility. The air was cool, the sun dipping low behind the trees. I offered her the seat beside me and handed her a small envelope. She blinked. "What's this?" "Not for now," I said. "For when it matters." She looked at me, really looked. "You're not sick, are you?" I laughed softly. "No, dear. I'm just awake now." We sat in silence after that, our shoulders almost touching. I don't think she realized the magnitude of what had just happened, that I had just rewritten my legacy, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because sometimes the people who share your blood aren't the ones who carry your heart. And as the light faded and the first stars peeked through the sky, I made peace with something important. If Daniel had given me up, then I had every right to give myself forward, to someone who saw me, who valued me, who stayed. I didn't know then how quickly things would unravel, but I felt it, even then. A storm was coming, and I was finally ready to stand in the rain. It was well past midnight when I woke to the sound of muffled voices down the hallway. Most nights, the facility fell into a dead quiet after PM. Lights dimmed, residents tucked away in their rooms like forgotten books on a dusty shelf. But this night was different. I slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and opened the door just enough to see the hallway bathed in soft yellow light. At the far end, near the administrator's office, I saw Daniel. I froze. He was supposed to be out of town. He hadn't visited in weeks. And yet there he stood, tense, gesturing sharply as he spoke to a man in a gray suit, someone I didn't recognize. Their voices were low, but one phrase floated down the hall like smoke. "If she changes that will, I lose everything." I stepped back into the shadows. The lawyer, because that's who the other man had to be, sighed. "It's her legal right, Daniel. You can't stop her from doing it." "She's not thinking clearly," Daniel snapped. "She's alone, confused, probably being manipulated by some staff member." My blood ran cold. He was talking about Marissa. "I want a psychological evaluation, something official," he said. "If she's declared incompetent, the will can't be changed." I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they might hear it. "I'm not going to let her hand over my inheritance to some nurse," he hissed. "She owes me, owes him." He really believed that my life, my savings, my home, all of it belonged to him by default, that he was entitled to the sum of my existence because of biology. Then the lawyer asked, "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" Daniel's answer was immediate. "Do it." I backed into my room, shut the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. I wasn't sure what hurt more, what I'd heard, or the fact that deep down I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always been calculating, strategic, but now I saw the truth unmasked. He didn't care about my well-being. He cared about control, and that's when it hit me. I had always wondered about the night Richard died. It happened so suddenly. He had been in his office late, going through financial records while I was out visiting a friend. When I got home, he was already gone. A heart attack, they said. No one around to help. No. I remembered asking Daniel if he had talked to his father that day. He said no, but now I wasn't sure. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. Daniel didn't know I had overheard. He smiled thinly, handed me a box of herbal teas I didn't ask for, and said, "Thought you'd like these." I nodded, pretending. That afternoon, I asked one of the newer aides, a timid girl named Hannah, if she could find out which nurse had worked the front desk that night. She hesitated, then whispered, "It was Kristen, but she doesn't talk much." I found Kristen folding laundry in the back hallway. I waited until no one else was around. "I need to ask you something, off the record." She looked up, startled. "Okay. You saw my son here last night, didn't you?" Kristen paused, then slowly nodded. "And he wasn't visiting me, was he?" She swallowed. "No. He was in the office for a long time, arguing." "Did you hear anything?" Her voice dropped. "Only a little. Something about paperwork. And getting someone declared unfit." I thanked her, then walked away with the weight of it settling on my shoulders like lead. Back in my room, I stared at the photo Daniel had left weeks ago. One of him as a boy, smiling in his little league uniform. The child I raised. The boy I held during thunderstorms. The teenager I forgave when he lied about grades. The man I had defended even when Richard warned me he was becoming too selfish, too cold. I had loved him unconditionally. But now I understood. That love had always been a one-way street. And then, like a film reel flickering in reverse, memories rushed back, fast and sharp. Richard's phone call that day. The way Daniel arrived late to the hospital, with dry eyes and no sense of urgency. The silence that followed. Had he? I didn't want to finish the thought, but I already knew the answer. He hadn't helped his father, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. He let Richard die, so he wouldn't have to deal with the financial fallout of the company's debt. The debt Daniel had a hand in creating. And now, he was coming for me too. But I wasn't Richard, and I wasn't going to be erased quietly. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the envelope, the one I'd written to Marissa. It was time to deliver it, because war had been declared, and I had no intention of losing. It happened faster than I ever imagined. One moment, I was sitting in the garden with Marissa, watching the wind carry leaves across the path, like whispers from another life. And the next, I was being told to pack my things. Again. Only this time, I wasn't going to another room or a different wing of the building. I was being moved to a psychiatric unit. The nurse who delivered the message was new, polite, but mechanical. She said it like she was reading off a menu. Mrs. Walsh, the attending physician, has recommended a transfer for observation. A few days, just to ensure your safety. Safety from what? I asked. She blinked. There have been concerns about confusion, some unusual conversations, possible signs of delusion. I laughed, short and sharp. You mean me realizing my son's a vulture? She didn't answer. 2 orderlies showed up 10 minutes later with a wheelchair. I told them I didn't need it. They said it was protocol. I didn't resist, not because I accepted it, but because I knew resistance would only feed the lie. If I raised my voice, I'd be labeled irrational. If I refused to cooperate, they'd use it as evidence. I needed to stay calm. They wheeled me down a hallway I'd never noticed before, through a locked door with a security code I didn't have. The moment it clicked shut behind me, something deep inside me cracked. The air was different, sterile, thicker. The walls a muted shade of green that felt more prison than hospital. No photos, no music, just the quiet hum of despair. My new room was smaller, the bed bolted to the floor, a single window with safety glass. No sharp objects, no phone. No Marissa. I asked the nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a tight bun, how long I'd be there. Until the evaluation is complete, she said. And who ordered it? She hesitated, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Your son made the request, she finally said, with a supporting statement from Dr. Levin. Dr. Levin, the facility's medical director, a man I'd spoken to 3 times briefly and never once confided in. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, trying to control the fire rising in my chest. So this was Daniel's next move. He couldn't undo the will on his own. But if I was declared mentally unfit, legally incompetent, then everything I'd worked so hard to protect could be overturned. And I would be silenced, literally locked away. The first night in that room was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I barely moved. The lights outside my door stayed on all night, spilling in through the gap like a spotlight. They brought me pills. I refused to take them. They tried to coax me, said I needed rest, that I was agitated. I wasn't agitated. I was aware. I thought of Richard, of how he must have felt, alone in that office, clutching his chest and dialing the number of the one person he thought would save him. And I thought of Daniel, looking at the phone and choosing not to answer. I cried that night. Not out of fear, but because I realized how little I meant to him. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was an obstacle. But then, I remembered Marissa, her hands, her laugh, her promise, and I knew she wouldn't let this go. The next day, a social worker came in, a young man named Kevin. He introduced himself with a clipboard and a soft tone. I'm here to talk, Mrs. Walsh. Just routine questions. Don't waste your breath, I said. You're not here for my benefit. You're here to validate paperwork. He blinked. That's not true. Then let me make a phone call. He hesitated. That's not permitted without physician approval. I stared at him. So much for rights. He left 15 minutes later, clearly rattled. I didn't give him the performance they expected. I didn't rant or cry. I just told the truth. Calm, cold, clear. They wanted a breakdown. I gave them composure. Later that evening, while I was pretending to nap, I heard voices outside my door. "She's lucid," one of the nurses whispered. "Honestly, more coherent than half the staff." "Orders are orders," the other replied. I felt a flicker of hope. Not everyone was blind. Still, I was trapped, and time was running out. But I knew Marissa, and I knew something Daniel didn't. He had underestimated me, but he had no idea what I'd taught her. The first time Marissa tried to see me after they moved me, they turned her away. She told me that later. She had rushed in during her shift, still in her scrubs, her badge swinging, her heart probably pounding harder than she'd ever admit. She asked the front desk nurse where I had been transferred and was met with blank stares. "Mrs. Walsh is no longer under your care," they told her. "The matter is being handled internally." She told me her hands started shaking, that she felt like she was going to scream, but didn't. She knew better. Marissa was smart. She knew the game they were playing. She just didn't know how deep Daniel's reach really went. But she started digging. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was on a mission. She called the lawyer I had been working with, James Palmer, and demanded a meeting. When he hesitated, she sent him the letter I had written and sealed weeks earlier, the one I had tucked into my drawer like a seed I prayed would grow when the time came. That letter changed everything. James called her back within an hour. He met her in his office the next morning. And from what Marissa later told me, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. She told him everything about the change in my will, the increasing pressure from Daniel, the way I was suddenly declared unstable out of nowhere. She also brought something else with her, a voice recording. 2 weeks earlier, during a routine hallway conversation, Daniel had been speaking to the facility's administrator near the nurses' station. He hadn't noticed that Marissa had her phone in her coat pocket, and he hadn't known she had accidentally hit record while reaching for a pen. In that recording, his voice was clear. He said the words plainly. "She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. That nurse, she's conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to the way it should be." That audio clip was more than enough to raise alarms. But Marissa didn't stop there. She tracked down Kristen, the night shift nurse who had seen Daniel at the facility after hours. Kristen was hesitant at first, scared of losing her job, but Marissa told her the truth, that if she stayed silent, she'd be complicit in something worse than neglect. Kristen agreed to sign a statement. Then came the medical records. Marissa noticed inconsistencies in the evaluation ordered by Dr. Levin, dates that didn't match, statements attributed to me that I never made, medications I was supposedly non-compliant with, even though I had never once refused a prescription before the psychiatric transfer. She took everything, statements, recordings, medical inconsistencies, and brought them to James. Together, they filed for an emergency hearing with a judge. They called it what it was, elder abuse. And while all that happened out there, I was still inside that locked wing, pacing the length of my room like a caged animal. Every day they brought pills. Every day I refused them. My chart filled with words like uncooperative and defensive, as if I were being difficult just for the pleasure of it. But I knew the truth. They wanted me numb. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me gone. I didn't know what Marissa was doing. I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it. But I believed in her, because she was the only person in that building who had ever looked me in the eye and seen a human being, not a patient, not a burden, not a bank account. And when they finally told me I had a hearing scheduled with a judge, I knew she had found a way through. They let me shower the morning of the hearing, gave me clean clothes, offered a cup of coffee I didn't trust. A nurse came in to brush my hair, trying to make it all look presentable. But I didn't care about appearances. I was preparing for war. And I wasn't walking into that courtroom as a victim. I was walking in as someone who had nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to say. They transported me in a van with tinted windows, like I was some kind of criminal. 2 orderlies sat in the front, talking about their lunch plans while I sat in the back, hands folded in my lap, pretending not to hear. But I heard everything. I heard how they referred to me, the old lady with the nurse problem. I heard them joke about how I must be faking it just to get attention, and I memorized every word, because soon their words would matter. The courthouse wasn't far, just a small gray building with a broken flag outside and too many parking spaces. I was led through a side entrance, away from the public, like I was something shameful to be hidden from view. But inside that small courtroom, I saw her, Marissa. She sat near the front, wearing a simple navy blouse, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw me enter, her eyes flooded with emotion. She didn't speak, just nodded, as if to say, "I told you I'd come." And then I saw Daniel, sitting with his lawyer, smug as ever, his suit too perfect, his posture too rehearsed. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. He thought he'd already won. The judge was a woman, late 50s, sharp eyes, no nonsense tone. She looked at me like she hadn't made up her mind yet. That gave me hope. James stood and began. He laid out the facts, slowly, methodically, like a scalpel, not a hammer. He presented Marissa's audio recording, Kristen's statement, the discrepancies in my medical records, and then he played the tape. Daniel's voice filled the room, cold, calculated, ugly. She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. That nurse, she's conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to the way it should be. The courtroom went silent. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but it was too late. The words were already in the air, staining everything. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. My knees trembled, but my voice did not. "I may be old," I said, "but I am not confused. I am not senile, and I am not finished." I looked directly at Daniel. "I trusted you. I loved you. I forgave you for so many things I shouldn't have. But when you let your father die, when you ignored his call for help so you wouldn't be held responsible for your own mistakes, you crossed a line I cannot and will not forgive." Gasps echoed. Daniel turned pale. I continued, "This isn't about money. It's not even about the will. It's about dignity. It's about being seen, being heard, being human. And if my life is worth nothing more to my own son than a $, then I will spend what's left of it with someone who treats me like I matter." Marissa's eyes welled with tears. She reached for a tissue, quietly. The judge called for a recess. When we returned, her voice was firm, resolute. "Mrs. Walsh is of sound mind and full legal capacity. This court finds the petition for guardianship filed by Mr. Daniel Walsh to be baseless and frankly disturbing." She turned to Daniel. She turned to, "You should consider yourself lucky she doesn't press criminal charges." And just like that, I was free. Free from the walls, free from the silence, free from the son who had turned his back on everything good and decent. Outside the courthouse, Marissa hugged me. Not hard, just enough, just right. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said. "We did." But deep down, I knew the real battle was just beginning, because the law might have cleared my name, but I was far from done clearing my legacy. The morning after the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror in my old room, my real room at the facility. The same beige walls, the small window that let in slivers of morning light, the photo of Richard and me still tucked into the corner of the vanity. But something had changed. I had changed. They tried to break me. Daniel tried to erase me, but I was still here. Marissa came in just before breakfast, carrying a tray with pancakes and fresh strawberries, my favorite. She said nothing at first, just set the tray down and pulled up a chair. Her eyes were tired, but her smile was wide. "Victory pancakes," she said. I chuckled. We earned them. That day, the staff treated me differently, a little more respectfully. Some avoided eye contact, especially those who had followed orders blindly. Others apologized in quiet, nervous tones. I didn't hold grudges, but I remembered everything. Daniel, on the other hand, disappeared. He didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even send his lawyer to clean up the mess. It was as if he'd vanished into the shadows, hoping to wait out the storm, but I wasn't done with him. That same week, I finalized the adoption paperwork with James. Marissa Carter officially, legally, became my daughter. On paper, in court, in heart. The process was surprisingly simple. A judge asked if this was truly what I wanted. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. Because what makes someone family isn't DNA. It's who shows up when you're broken. It's who fights for you when everyone else walks away. Daniel found out about the adoption the following Monday. He sent me an email, a single line. "You'll regret this." I deleted it. He wasn't angry because I gave Marissa my money. He was angry because I gave her my love. The next few days, I felt lighter. I spent more time outside. I laughed more. I helped Marissa plan Mia's birthday, an outdoor party with balloons, cupcakes, and paper crowns. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found an old scarf Richard had given me. I held it against my cheek and closed my eyes, remembering his voice, his quiet strength. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered. And in that moment, I felt something inside me settle, something that had been restless for too long. But the peace didn't last. One morning, James called. "Daniel is trying to contest the will again," he said. "This time, claiming undue influence. He's hiring a new team. He wants it all reversed." Of course he did. A snake doesn't change. He just sheds his skin. But this time, I was ready. We had recordings, witnesses, medical proof of my mental clarity, legal guardianship of my own estate. And now, we had the adoption. He couldn't touch a single dollar without unraveling the entire web he'd spun. Still, the anxiety returned, because no matter how strong I felt, part of me still hurt. He was my son. He was my baby once, and now he was the villain of my story. That night, I sat with Marissa in the garden. We watched the sun dip below the trees, casting long golden shadows across the grass. Mia ran around chasing fireflies, her laughter carrying through the air like music. "I wish I could say I don't care," I said quietly. "But I do. I still care." Marissa didn't respond right away. She reached for my hand, warm and steady. "You don't have to stop caring," she said. "You just have to stop letting him hurt you." And she was right. I would always love the little boy Daniel once was, but I would no longer mourn the man he became, because I had a new chapter to live now, and I had a new family to live it with. The final battle was coming, and when it did, I'd be ready to close the book. The courtroom felt colder this time. Maybe it was the tension in the air, or maybe it was because I knew exactly what Daniel was trying to do. Again, he wasn't just contesting the will. He was trying to erase everything I'd done, every step I'd taken to protect my name, my dignity, and the one person who had stood by me when everyone else disappeared. Marissa sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, now my legal daughter. Her hands were steady, but I could see the way her shoulders held tension, like she was ready to spring into defense at any moment, like a soldier. Daniel, dressed in another expensive suit, didn't even glance my way. His lawyer, new, polished, arrogant, tried to paint a picture of manipulation, that Marissa had preyed on an elderly woman, that I'd been coerced, that none of my decisions could be trusted. They played the age card. They played the vulnerable senior card. But they forgot one thing. I was still alive, still present, still powerful. I stood when called. My voice was clear, strong. I made every decision with full knowledge of what I was doing, I said, looking directly at the judge, and I stand by them. I changed my will not out of confusion, but out of clarity. I chose to give my legacy to someone who earned it, not someone who assumed he was entitled to it. The opposing lawyer smirked. "And what about your son? You're saying he deserves nothing?" I didn't flinch. "I'm saying he deserves exactly what he gave me in the last years of my life. Silence, distance, disregard." A murmur spread across the courtroom. Then James, my lawyer, took the floor. He presented the adoption papers. Legal, complete, airtight. He presented Marissa's years of service, her spotless record, her unwavering loyalty. He reminded the court of Daniel's previous attempt to have me committed. And then he dropped the final blow, the audio recording again. Daniel's voice, smug and unfiltered, speaking about manipulating the system to reclaim the will. The judge leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and sighed. "I've seen a lot of ugly family disputes," she said. "But this is different. This is calculated cruelty, masked as concern." She turned to Daniel. "Mr. Walsh, not only do I deny your petition, but I am referring your behavior to the State Bar Association for review. If this courtroom allowed emotional damages, you'd owe your mother far more than money." I couldn't help it. I let the tears fall, not from sadness, from release. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but I didn't stop. Marissa and I walked hand in hand to the car. We didn't need a statement. We didn't need the world to understand, because we understood. Back at the facility, I packed my things for the last time, not in secret, not in fear, but with joy. We were moving into a small house just outside of town, a modest cottage with a backyard and a garden I could tend again. Marissa called it ours. Mia had already picked out where her swing set would go. As I zipped up the final suitcase, I glanced around the room that had once felt like a prison. It was just a space now, a chapter that had served its purpose. Before we left, I placed the old photo of Richard and me in my bag. I looked at his face, his smile. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I didn't let him take everything." Outside, Marissa honked gently from the car. I took one last look, then closed the door behind me. And just like that, I walked out, not defeated, but reborn, not forgotten, chosen. The sun was warm on my face as we pulled into the driveway of our new home. It wasn't large or fancy, just a simple cottage with pale blue shutters and a porch swing already squeaking in the breeze. But to me, it felt like a palace, because this time, I had chosen it. No one had dragged me here. No one had packed my things without asking. I came on my own terms, and I brought with me the only people who had truly stayed. Marissa helped me out of the car while Mia ran ahead, laughing as she announced which bedroom she wanted. There were daisies in the front yard, already blooming. I smiled. Richard would have loved this place. I hadn't heard a word from Daniel since the ruling. No calls, no emails, nothing. Part of me kept waiting for a final plea or maybe an apology. But none came, and that silence said more than any words ever could. We unpacked slowly, savoring each moment. I placed Richard's photo on the mantel. Marissa hung up drawings Mia had made in school. We filled the kitchen with smells, cinnamon, basil, fresh bread. Life returned to my bones in ways I didn't know I still needed. A week later, a letter arrived, not from Daniel, from his lawyer. It was a formal notification. Daniel had filed for bankruptcy. Apparently, his reputation had taken a hit after the court hearing. His real estate ventures had started to crumble, investors pulling out. Word had gotten around. You can't hide a heart like his forever. And just like that, the man who had tried to steal everything from me lost everything himself. I didn't smile when I read it. I didn't gloat. But I did exhale, deeply, fully, for the first time in years. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's watching your enemy fall without ever having to lift a hand. One afternoon, I sat on the back porch with Marissa. The air smelled like fresh grass and warm soil. She was reading, and I was crocheting something for Mia's room. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving me so much?" I looked up, surprised. "I didn't give you anything," I said. "You earned it. You. Every bit of it." She looked down, her eyes glassy. "No one's ever said that to me before." I reached over, took her hand in mine. "Well, get used to it," I smiled. "You're stuck with me now." That night, I dreamed of Richard. We were dancing in the living room, slow and silly like we used to. He was wearing those ridiculous plaid slippers, and I could feel his hand on my waist like he'd never left. When I woke up, there were birds singing outside. The sun filtered through the curtains. I could hear Mia giggling from her room, and I realized something. This was home. Not the house, not the bricks or the furniture, the feeling, the peace, the laughter, the love. I had found my family, not in blood, but in the ones who chose to stay. Daniel had lost a fortune, but I had gained a future, and I wouldn't trade places with him for all the money in the world. The garden was full of light. Golden afternoon sun spilled across the rows of fresh soil, where I had just planted a handful of wildflower seeds with Mia. Her tiny hands had been covered in dirt, her face smudged, but her laughter, pure, unfiltered joy, still echoed in the breeze. I sat on the porch swing now, a glass of lemonade in my hand, watching her run across the lawn with her little butterfly net, chasing nothing in particular. And Marissa? She stood barefoot in the grass, smiling, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. She looked younger these days, lighter, like some invisible weight had finally lifted from her shoulders. This was peace. This was healing. This was everything I'd been denied, and everything I had chosen to build with the pieces left behind. For so long, I thought growing old meant losing pieces of yourself. I thought it meant being erased, made invisible. I never imagined I'd be fighting for my name, my worth, my voice. But I did fight, and I won. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth, with grace, with clarity. After the ruling, Daniel never reached out again. Not to apologize, not to explain, just silence. And I let it stay that way. There's a kind of mourning that comes with letting go of someone you once loved unconditionally. It's quiet and slow and private, but it's necessary. I don't hate him. I don't wish him pain. I just don't give him the power to define me anymore. Instead, I poured my energy into planting, into baking, into showing Mia how to make her first peach cobbler, into helping Marissa get her nursing certification upgraded so she could open a small private care service from home. We became something more than a household. We became a family, a real one, built not from shared blood but from shared battles, from loyalty, from love in its purest form. Every morning, I wake up and choose this life, not because it's perfect, but because it's mine, and because I fought for it. I thought my story was ending the day Daniel wheeled me into that facility, but I was wrong. That was just the beginning of my final act, the one I got to write, the one that ends with my hands in the dirt, laughter in the air, and peace in my chest. As the sun dipped lower, I reached over and picked a single sunflower from the pot beside me, my favorite. Richard once told me sunflowers always turn toward the light. I think I finally understand what he meant, because even after everything, after the betrayal, the silence, the isolation, I found the light again. I let it find me, and I followed it home. The blood may have abandoned me, but the love saved me. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.